The stars stretched endlessly across the black sea of space, shining like scattered diamonds. Among them moved a single silver vessel, small compared to the massive warships of the great empires. This ship was not built for war but for diplomacy, carrying the fragile hope of peace and friendship between two very different species. On board sat a young man named Toma, quiet and thoughtful, staring out the window at the endless sky. He was not a soldier, not a leader, and not someone who expected to change the fate of worlds. He was only a translator, chosen because of his gift with languages. While others studied weapons and politics, Thomas studied sounds, meanings, and words that connected hearts. Still, even he felt the weight of the moment. The ship carried a small human delegation, invited to the grand court of the Iradians, one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The Iradians were tall, elegant beings, with proud traditions and sharp eyes that missed nothing. To them, humans were new, too young, too fragile, and perhaps too simple to stand among ancient species. As the ship drew closer to the Iradian homeworld, Thoma's hands tightened nervously. He had read about the capital city, built across mountains that rose higher than clouds, with shining palaces carved from crystal and stone. He had also read that the Iradians were quick to judge, and that humans were often spoken of as the children of the stars, too weak to matter in serious matters of the galaxy. The ship landed in a great courtyard filled with light. Tall spires surrounded the landing field, and soldiers in shining armor stood in formation. The air was cool, carrying the scent of flowers Toma had never smelled before. He followed the human leaders down the ramp, his steps careful, his eyes wide. The Iradian nobles stood waiting, dressed in robes of deep blue and silver. Their movements were graceful, their voices calm, but Toma felt the cold distance in their gaze. It was as if the humans were not guests, but curiosities brought for study. And then he saw her. At the center of the nobles stood a young woman unlike the rest. She was tall, with features both sharp and soft, and her presence seemed to brighten the courtyard more than the morning sun. Her eyes held quiet strength, her posture carried the dignity of her people, and the way she moved made even the proudest noble step aside. This was Princess Aurea, heir to the Iradian throne. Toma had read her name in records, but no words could have prepared him for her presence. She was not like the painted portraits or the cold statues of royalty. She was real, living, and so very striking. Something stirred in him, a feeling so strong it rose before he could hold it back. His voice, soft and almost a whisper, escaped him without thought. "She's so beautiful." The words were not meant for anyone. They were not meant for the court, not meant for his leaders, and certainly not meant for the princess herself. They were only a thought spoken aloud, a small truth that had slipped free. But the courtyard was quiet, and sound traveled easily. Princess Aurea's sharp hearing caught every syllable. Her eyes, calm and unreadable, shifted ever so slightly toward the small human translator at the back of the group. For a brief second, her gaze met his. Toma froze. His heart raced. Did she hear him? No, surely not. He told himself that his voice had been too soft, that the distance was too great. He quickly looked down, pretending to study his notes, hoping no one had noticed. The human delegation was welcomed with formal words, though the tone was cold. The Iradian nobles spoke of honor, tradition, and duty, their voices heavy with pride. The human leaders replied with practiced politeness, careful not to offend. Toma's role was only to listen and translate when needed, but his mind kept drifting back to the princess standing at the center of it all. Princess Aurea, for her part, did not reveal any change of expression. She continued with her duties, greeting the humans with grace, her voice calm and measured. Yet somewhere deep inside, a faint spark of curiosity stirred. No alien ever dared to speak of her beauty, for fear of insult or offense. But a human had whispered it with no agenda, no plan, just honesty. The meeting ended, and the humans were led to their chambers within the palace. The halls were vast, lined with glowing crystals that lit the way like soft stars. Toma followed behind, his heart still uneasy. He told himself it did not matter, that the princess surely hadn't heard him. But part of him wondered. In the silence of the great palace, two thoughts lingered, one in the heart of a nervous human who feared he had made a mistake, and the other in the mind of a princess who had, for the first time, been called beautiful not by duty, but by truth. And so began a story neither of them could have imagined. The grand palace of the Iratians was a place of wonder. Its walls were carved with stories older than the stars humans had just begun to cross. Towering pillars reached upward, holding crystal arches that glowed faintly like frozen light. To the human visitors, every corner of the palace was overwhelming. For Toma, it was more than overwhelming, it was intimidating. He walked quietly behind the human delegation, clutching his notes as though they were a shield. His role was simple: listen, translate, and remain unnoticed. Yet in his heart, he carried the memory of that single moment in the courtyard, when his whisper had escaped. He kept telling himself she hadn't heard. She could not have heard, he repeated in his mind, over and over. The princess had been standing so far away, surrounded by her nobles. Surely his words had vanished into the air before reaching her ears. But he was wrong. Princess Arya remembered. She did not let her thoughts show, for an heir to the throne could not display curiosity over such a small matter. Her face remained calm, her voice steady as she welcomed the delegation, but deep inside her, a seed of wonder had been planted. No one in her life had ever spoken to her that way. Nobles praised her wisdom, soldiers praised her discipline, poets praised her bloodline, but none had ever called her beautiful without a reason. And this small human, standing in the back with wide eyes and nervous steps, had whispered it as though he could not help himself. Honest. Unplanned. Pure. That night, as the palace lights dimmed and the delegation rested in their chambers, Arya found her thoughts drifting back to him. She had not even heard his name, yet his voice lingered in her mind. Why had he spoken so? Did humans always let their thoughts slip so easily, or was this one different? The next morning, the court assembled once more. The hall was vast, with high ceilings that made even the tallest beings feel small. Nobles gathered in long rows, speaking in their rich and flowing tongue. The human delegation stood nervously, waiting to be addressed. Toma took his usual place at the side, ready to translate. His fingers traced the lines of his notes, though his eyes sometimes wandered. He tried not to look toward the throne, but his gaze betrayed him. There she was, Princess Arya, seated with dignity, her silver robe flowing like water around her. Her expression remained distant, but her eyes were sharper than before, as though they were quietly studying everything. Toma quickly lowered his gaze, embarrassed by his own curiosity. But Arya noticed. Throughout the long discussions of trade, territory, and alliances, her eyes returned to him more than once. She watched the way he leaned forward when others spoke, how carefully he listened, how his lips moved silently as he tested words before speaking aloud. While most humans seemed uneasy in the grand court, Toma showed something else: focus. When one of the alien ambassadors used an old proverb filled with double meanings, it was Toma who leaned close to his leader and whispered the true sense behind the words. His leader nodded quickly, avoiding what could have been a grave mistake. Arya's gaze narrowed slightly. Few even among her own court understood the layers of that proverb, yet this human had caught it. Perhaps his whisper in the courtyard had not been the only surprising thing about him. Later, as the meeting ended, the nobles gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Some laughed softly, mocking the humans for their small size and simple clothing. They look like children, one noble sneered. How can such fragile beings hope to stand among us? Toma heard the words but kept silent. He was used to such things. Humans were always the newcomers, the weak ones, the ones underestimated. His job was not to argue, but to observe. But Princess Arya heard too. For the first time, the mocking of humans stirred something unfamiliar in her. She did not speak, for it was not her place to silence every careless tongue, yet she felt a quiet defense forming in her heart. The same human they mocked had already proven sharper than they realized. That evening, when the delegation was escorted through the palace gardens, Tomo lagged behind, unable to resist the sight of strange glowing flowers and towering trees that sang softly in the wind. He scribbled notes quickly, fascinated by the alien beauty around him. And once again, she was there. Princess Arya walked ahead with the nobles, but her gaze slipped back. She saw him bending over a flower, his face lit with childlike wonder. He looked so different from the proud warriors of her people, smaller, yes, but also lighter, freer, as if he carried curiosity instead of pride. For the briefest moment, their eyes met again. Toma froze, realizing she had caught him staring. His cheeks grew warm, and he quickly looked away, pretending to adjust his notes. But Arya did not look away so quickly this time. In the quiet of the evening garden, she realized something unexpected. The human's whisper had followed her not just because of its honesty, but because of the person who spoke it. And though she would never admit it aloud, she found herself wanting to know more about him. Thus, a fragile thread was woven soft, unseen, and delicate as silk. A thread between a human who believed himself unnoticed, and a princess who noticed everything. The days in the Iratian court passed with endless meetings. Nobles spoke of alliances, trade, and defense. Every word was polished, every sentence wrapped in pride. Yet beneath the shining halls and calm voices, there was an unease that no one spoke of directly. The Zyrans. They were a rival species, known across the stars for their cunning and cruelty. Unlike the Iratians, who valued honor and tradition, the Zyrans valued only victory. They struck from shadows, broke treaties without shame, and thrived in the chaos of war. For years, they had been testing the borders of the empire, probing for weakness. The human delegation, still new to galactic politics, had been invited partly as observers. The Iratians wanted to show their strength, to prove that humans should stand behind them like younger siblings. At least, that was the surface truth. But as the discussions dragged on, Toma began to notice something strange. He sat quietly at the edge of the chamber, translating when asked, listening when no one noticed. Words, to him, were not just sound. They carried tone, rhythm, and hidden meaning. And the more he listened, the more he felt something was wrong. One afternoon, the court gathered to hear an envoy from the Zyrans. The hall grew colder as the alien entered. Tall, with skin like dark stone and eyes like burning coals, the envoy bowed stiffly. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like a blade hidden beneath silk. Great Iratian court, the Zyran began, we come with peace in our hearts. We bring offers of friendship, of trade, of unity. The nobles nodded politely, but Toma frowned. Something in the way the envoy spoke struck him as false. The words were friendly, but the rhythm was sharp, clipped at the edges. He leaned closer, listening not just to the words but to the pauses between them. Then he heard it. Hidden in the envoy's speech was a pattern, an old style of coded talk. It was subtle, woven into the order of his phrases. To most ears, it was invisible, but to someone who studied language the way Toma did, it was as clear as a shadow on the wall. The envoy was sending a message. A threat. Toma's heart pounded. He scribbled notes quickly, his hands shaking. The hidden meaning was chilling, the night falls soon. Walls will break. Weak allies fall first. He swallowed hard. Should he say something? He was only a translator, not a leader. What if he was wrong? But the more he looked, the more certain he became. The Zyran envoy was not here for peace. He was warning of an attack. As the envoy finished, The nobles clapped politely, their faces calm. None of them seemed to notice the danger. The human leaders whispered among themselves, unsure of how to respond. And so, with trembling courage, Tomo leaned forward and spoke softly to his own ambassador. "Sir, he is not speaking truth. His words carry threat. He says an attack is coming." The human ambassador stiffened, glancing at Tomo with surprise. "Are you certain?" "Yes," Tomo whispered, his voice firm despite his fear. "The message is hidden in his phrases." "I am certain." The ambassador hesitated, but before he could reply, another voice rang through the hall. "Explain yourself." It was Princess Arya. Her sharp eyes were fixed on Toma. The hall fell silent, every noble turning to stare at the small human translator. Toma's throat went dry. He had not meant for his warning to be heard by the entire court. His voice trembled as he stood, bowing low. "Your Highness, forgive me. But I believe the envoy's words carry hidden meaning. He speaks of peace, but his rhythm is a code. It warns of attack. Soon." Murmurs swept through the hall. Nobles shook their heads, some with disbelief, others with laughter. "Absurd," one scoffed. "A human claims to hear secret codes where none exist." "Do you think us fools, boy?" another snapped. "You dishonor the court with your games." Tomo lowered his eyes, his heart sinking. He knew they would not believe him. Why should they? He was only a human, a newcomer among giants. But then, to his surprise, Arya spoke again. "Silence." The word cut through the hall like steel. The nobles fell quiet, their eyes wide with shock. The princess rose slowly, her gaze never leaving Toma. "You claim to hear what others do not," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "Why should we trust you?" Toma's voice trembled, but he spoke the truth. "Because I have nothing to gain, princess. I am not a noble. I am not a soldier. I am only a translator. But words are my world, and I know when words carry shadows." For a long moment, the hall was silent. Then Arya looked to the Zyran envoy, her eyes narrowing. The envoy's smile was thin, his coal-like eyes flickering. He did not deny the accusation. Arya's thoughts turned quickly. She remembered the human's whisper in the courtyard, so honest and unguarded. She remembered watching him catch the meaning of a proverb others had missed. And now, here he was, standing in front of an entire court, risking humiliation to speak the truth. Perhaps humans were not so simple after all. "Leave us," Arya commanded the Zyran envoy. Her voice carried no warmth. The envoy bowed stiffly and departed, his steps echoing like distant thunder. When the hall was empty, Arya turned back to the nobles. "Perhaps we should not laugh so quickly," she said. "Perhaps the humans see what we do not." Her words sent ripples through the court. Some still scoffed, but others began to wonder. And in the quiet corner of the hall, Tomo lowered his head, his cheeks burning, yet his heart steady. For the first time, he had spoken not as a translator, but as a voice of warning. And the princess had listened. The great palace was quiet at night. The long halls, bright with crystal light in the day, now glowed faintly like sleeping stars. Most nobles rested in their chambers, trusting the guards to watch the walls. But not everyone slept. Princess Arya sat alone in her study, her face lit by the soft glow of an ancient lamp. Scrolls and records lay scattered across her desk. Her mind should have been at peace, yet the words of the young human returned again and again. "He speaks of peace, but his rhythm is a code." The nobles had laughed. They said humans were foolish dreamers. But Arya had not laughed. She had seen the steadiness in Toma's eyes, the way his voice shook yet did not falter. He had spoken truthfully, not to gain favor, not to rise in rank, but simply because he believed what he had heard. That honesty stirred something deep inside her. At last, she made her decision. She could not let the matter rest. She needed proof. And to find it, she needed the very human who had risked shame to warn her court. Thomas sat in his chamber, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. He could not sleep. His thoughts were heavy, filled with worry that he had overstepped his place. Perhaps the princess had been kind only for a moment, and tomorrow the nobles would dismiss him again. He sighed softly, closing his eyes. Then a sound startled him, a knock at the door. He opened it carefully, and his heart nearly stopped. Standing there, dressed in a cloak of midnight blue, was Princess Arya herself. "Your Highness." Toma gasped, stepping back in shock. "Quiet," Arya said softly, her tone firm but not unkind. "Come with me." He hesitated, confused and nervous, but when she turned and began walking down the hall, he had no choice but to follow. The guards did not question her, and soon they were moving through the quiet passages of the palace. At last, they entered a tall chamber lined with shelves of crystal tablets and golden scrolls. "The archives," Arya said simply. Toma's eyes widened. He had only heard of this place. The Iradians guarded their history carefully, storing every record of war, treaty, and secret code within these walls. Few were allowed inside. "Why bring me here?" he asked softly. "Because you hear what others do not," Arya replied. Her gaze was sharp, searching his face. "If the Zirans hide threats in words, then perhaps they have done so before. These records may hold the truth." Thomas swallowed. He had not expected this. A princess asking him, a human translator, for help? Still, he nodded. "I will try." For hours they worked side by side. Arya lit the lamps, pulling scrolls and tablets from the shelves, while Toma read carefully, listening not to the meaning alone but to the rhythm and tone of the words recorded. Many times Arya caught herself watching him. His hands moved quickly across the notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Unlike her nobles, who often performed their knowledge like actors on a stage, Toma seemed to carry his learning quietly, as though it belonged to him alone. At last, he paused, tapping a finger on a passage. "Here," he whispered. Arya leaned closer. The scroll was centuries old, written in the flowing script of her ancestors. "What do you see?" she asked. Toma pointed. "The speech here, it is almost the same rhythm as the envoy yesterday. The words are polite, but hidden beneath is a pattern. Listen, the fields grow ripe. The storm will come. The harvest will not be yours. This is not peace. It is warning." Arya's eyes narrowed. She remembered the history well. Shortly after the speech was recorded, the Zirans had attacked a border world. Thousands had died. The nobles of that time had dismissed the warnings, just as the nobles of today dismissed Toma. "You were right," Arya said quietly. Toma blinked, hardly believing the words. "You hear what my court cannot," she continued. "Your gift is real. And if the envoy yesterday used the same code, then war may already be at our gates." Silence filled the chamber. The weight of the discovery settled between them. Arya stood tall, but her voice softened. "Why did you speak, human? You must have known they would laugh at you." Toma lowered his gaze. "Because silence would have been worse. If there is danger, someone must say it. Even if no one listens." For the first time, Arya's lips curved into the faintest smile. His words reminded her of something rare: honesty without pride, courage without armor. "You are unlike my nobles," she said. Toma flushed, unsure if it was praise or not. "I am only doing my duty." "Perhaps," Arya murmured, her eyes lingering on him. "But sometimes duty is not enough. Sometimes truth must be spoken, even when it is unwelcome." The lamps flickered softly around them. In that quiet moment, the distance between princess and translator felt smaller than before. When dawn approached, Arya carefully sealed the scrolls again. "You will not speak of this to anyone," she commanded. "If the Zyrans plan betrayal, we must move with care. My court is filled with pride, and pride blinds even sharp eyes. But together, perhaps we can see clearly." Toma bowed his head. "As you wish, princess." And so, in the silent archives of the palace, an alliance was born, not between empires, but between a human who listened to whispers and a princess who had finally chosen to hear. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night would change the course of their lives and perhaps the fate of two worlds. The palace stood bright beneath the twin moons, its towers shining like blades of crystal. To any visitor, it seemed untouchable, a fortress of pride and history. But inside, danger was already moving like a shadow. The Iratian nobles believed the threat had passed. The Zyran envoy had departed, his voice calm, his words polite. Many dismissed Toma's warning as the overthinking of a nervous human. They laughed behind closed doors, calling him a child who chased ghosts in words. Only Princess Arya did not laugh. She kept silent in the court, but her mind remained alert. The hidden code in the envoy's speech, the old records she had uncovered with Toma, it all pointed to one truth. The Zyrans would not rest. They would strike, and soon. And she was right. It began on a night when the palace halls were quiet, the nobles sleeping peacefully. Toma was awake in his chamber, unable to rest. His mind replayed every discovery in the archives, every hidden phrase he had uncovered with the princess. He wondered if anyone besides her would ever take his words seriously. Then he heard it, an echo, faint but sharp. The sound of metal against stone. He froze, listening. Another sound followed, soft but clear, footsteps, quick and purposeful. Toma's chest tightened. The guards outside were trained to move with silence, but these steps were different. Too many. Too heavy. He moved to the door, pressing his ear against it. A whisper reached him, alien words in a tongue not belonging to the Iratians. The Zyrans were inside. He rushed into the hall, heart pounding. The guards lay silent on the floor, stunned by hidden weapons. Figures in dark armor slipped through the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly red. They moved with deadly purpose, heading toward the royal wing. Toma's breath caught. They were going for the princess. He should have run. He was no soldier, no warrior. What could a human with no weapon do against assassins trained for war? Yet his feet did not turn away. Something stronger than fear moved him. He grabbed a heavy lamp from the wall and followed. The Zyrans entered the royal chambers with precision. Princess Arya awoke to the sound of her guards falling. She leapt from her bed, her training sharp, her hand reaching for the ceremonial blade at her side. But there were too many of them, shadows slipping through the walls, blades flashing in the moonlight. And then a sound broke the silence. A human cry. Toma charged into the room, swinging the lamp with desperate strength. The glass shattered against the first Zyran's armor, sparks of fire spilling across the floor. The assassin stumbled, startled not by the attack itself, but by who delivered it. A human. "Run, princess!" Toma shouted, standing between her and the shadows. Arya's eyes widened. She had expected her guards, her nobles, anyone but him. The small translator, the one who should have hidden, was standing before her, trembling yet unyielding. The Zyrans advanced, confident and cruel. Toma grabbed a fallen staff from the floor, holding it clumsily like a spear. His arms shook, but his stance was firm. He would not let them pass. One assassin lunged. Toma barely dodged, swinging the staff wildly. It was not skill that saved him, but desperation. The strike hit the Zyran's arm, knocking the weapon aside. Another came forward, and this time Arya joined in, her blade flashing with trained grace. For a moment, human and princess fought side by side. She struck with precision, he with raw instinct, yet together they slowed the attackers. "Why are you here?" Arya gasped between strikes, her eyes never leaving the enemy. "I heard them," Thomas said, his voice strained. "I could not stay behind." Arya's heart pounded, though not only from battle. She saw the fire in his eyes, the refusal to bend. No noble she knew would risk their life without armor, without duty, without promise of glory. Yet here was a human, fragile and untrained, standing against death simply because he would not abandon her. It shook her more than the enemy's blades. The sound of alarms soon filled the palace. Guards rushed into the chamber, their weapons gleaming. The Zirans, realizing their window was gone, retreated with swift movements, vanishing into the shadows they came from. The danger was not over, but the attempt had failed. Arya stood in the wreckage of her chamber, her robe torn, her blade red. Tomo leaned heavily on the broken staff, his breath ragged, his arms trembling from the fight. "Are you hurt?" Arya asked, stepping closer. "Only scratches," Tomo replied, though blood marked his sleeve. He forced a weak smile. "You are safe. That is what matters." For a long moment, the princess did not speak. She simply looked at him, the translator who had no reason to fight, yet had done so anyway. The image of him standing before her, fragile but unyielding, burned into her memory. The guards bowed, awaiting her command. The nobles would soon awaken to the news of betrayal, their pride shaken, their certainty broken. But Arya's thoughts were elsewhere. She realized something that her people had never understood. Humans, though small, carried a strength that no armor could measure. Not strength of body, but of heart. And in that moment, she understood why the words he once whispered had stayed with her. "She's so beautiful." It had not been the words of a courtier, nor the flattery of a noble. It had been the truth, spoken by one who saw with honesty. And tonight, she had seen his truth in return. The attack had failed, but the war had only begun. Yet for Princess Arya, the night brought something more important than fear. It brought trust in a human who had proven himself not with weapons or rank, but with courage no one expected. And she knew the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The palace did not sleep after the Zyran attack. Guards rushed through the halls, nobles shouted in fear, and servants carried news like fire spreading across dry fields. The safe and shining home of the Iratians no longer felt untouchable. Princess Arya stood tall among the chaos, though her mind was sharp with worry. If the Zyrans dared to send assassins into the very heart of the empire, then the real strike would come soon, and it would be far worse. Beside her walked Toma, his arm still bandaged from the fight. He did not complain of pain, though Arya noticed the way he winced when the cloth pressed too tightly. Most humans would have begged for rest, but he followed her without hesitation. "You should remain in safety," she said quietly as they moved through the command hall. Thomas shook his head. "If safety means silence, I cannot. Not when danger is already here." Arya studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. She was used to soldiers who followed orders without question, nobles who spoke with pride but avoided risk. Toma was neither, yet he stayed by her side as if it was the only place he belonged. In the command hall, generals gathered around a vast table of light, maps glowing with shifting symbols. The border defenses had already reported Zyran movement fleets gathering at the edges of the empire. "They will strike the outer worlds first," one general said, his voice heavy with certainty. "No," another argued. "They aim for the capital. Last night's attack proves it. They seek to break us at the heart." The nobles shouted over each other, pride clouding reason. Arya raised her hand, silencing them. "Enough. We cannot fight shadows with noise." Thomas stood quietly at the edge, listening. His mind, trained to hear patterns others missed, caught something in the reports. The enemy was moving in two directions at once, too direct, too bold. It felt like a trap. He leaned toward Arya, speaking softly so only she could hear. "They want us to divide," he whispered. "If your fleets split, one half will be destroyed." Arya's gaze sharpened. She knew he was right. The Zyrans thrived on confusion, using clever tricks to draw enemies into weakness. And yet, if she repeated Toma's words aloud, the generals would dismiss them again. So she did something bold. "The fleets will not divide," she declared firmly. "We strike together, one shield, one blade. The enemy expects us to break apart. We will not." The generals exchanged uneasy glances but bowed to her command. Arya felt a quiet satisfaction. Toma had once again seen what others did not. That night, as the city prepared for war, the skies filled with fire. Zyran ships descended like storms, their weapons burning through the outer shields of the capital. Panic spread across the streets as citizens fled to shelters. The palace shook under the first strike. Crystals shattered, towers groaned, and alarms howled across the night. Arya stood at the gates of the command chamber, her blade at her side, ready to fight if the walls fell. Toma stood beside her, unarmed except for his quick mind and stubborn courage. His heart pounded, fear clawing at him, but he refused to leave. "Why are you here?" one soldier asked in disbelief. "You are no warrior. You will die when the walls fall." Toma's answer was simple. "Then I die standing." The soldier stared, then nodded silently. Perhaps courage was not measured in weapons after all. The Zyrans stormed the outer defenses, their dark forms swarming like a tide. The Iratian soldiers fought bravely, but the enemy's numbers seemed endless. In the command hall, voices rose in despair. "We are surrounded. We cannot hold." Arya's voice cut through. "We will hold. Fear is the enemy's greatest weapon. If we stand together, we cannot be broken." But it was not her voice alone that gave strength. It was Toma, running through the chamber, pointing out the patterns of the enemy strikes. He noticed the rhythm of their attacks, the way they circled before striking again. "Here," he cried, pointing at the glowing map. "They always leave the side weaker when they strike the other. Push there, break the rhythm." The generals hesitated, then obeyed. The soldiers shifted, striking where Toma had predicted, and for the first time the Zyran wave broke against a wall that did not fall. Hours of battle followed. Fire lit the sky, the city roared with chaos, yet the defenders stood. Arya fought with calm strength, her blade flashing in the light of burning towers. Toma moved through the halls, carrying messages, guiding soldiers, his mind turning fear into strategy. At last, as dawn touched the horizon, the Zyrans began to retreat. Their fleet, battered and frustrated, slipped back into the darkness of space. The city still stood. The palace still stood. The people still lived. The capital was saved not only by strength of arms, but by the courage of a human who refused to hide. When silence finally fell, the nobles gathered in disbelief. They looked at Toma differently now, not as a fragile outsider, but as one whose voice had turned the tide. Arya approached him, her silver robe torn, her face marked with battle dust. "You should not have stood in the storm," she said quietly. Toma smiled wearily. "Perhaps not. But storms are not weathered by hiding." For a long moment, Arya said nothing. Then, with a rare softness, she placed her hand briefly on his shoulder. "You have shown my people something they have forgotten, that even the smallest can stand unshaken." And as the light of dawn filled the ruined halls, Arya knew the war was not yet over. But something far greater had already begun, the rising of a truth that would change her empire forever. Humans were not weak. They were unbreakable. The city of Aradia did not look the same after the night of fire. Towers were cracked, the great shields of crystal lay in broken fragments, and the once bright streets were marked with ash. Yet despite the wounds, the city breathed still. Life had survived. The people began to rebuild with quiet strength. Markets reopened, children laughed in the corners of damaged courtyards, and voices of song returned to the air as workers cleared the ruins. Hope grew again, piece by piece. Princess Arya watched all this from the high balcony of the palace. Her eyes lingered on the streets below, where both Iratians and humans few but determined worked side by side. She had seen courage before, but what she saw now was something deeper. These humans did not see themselves as guests or weak dependents. They built as if the city belonged to them too. And perhaps it did. In the council chamber, the nobles gathered again. Their faces were more humble than before. They had seen the failure of their pride and the strength of unexpected allies. One noble spoke with hesitation. Perhaps, the human should be honored. His words saved the capital. Another, older noble frowned. He is no soldier, no leader. He is a stranger. Arya's voice rose above them, calm but sharp. He is no stranger. He is the reason we still stand. If the empire cannot honor truth because it comes from a human, then the empire has already lost. Her words fell like iron into silence. None dared argue further. Later, Toma walked through the palace gardens, his arm healing slowly under fresh bandages. He touched the trees, the flowers glowing faintly in the starlight, and felt a strange peace. This world was not his, yet it had become part of him. Arya joined him quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. The garden was calm, the faint songs of nightbirds echoing in the branches. Finally, she said, "Do you know what you have done?" Toma looked at her with surprise. "I only spoke what I saw." "You gave my people something they had forgotten," she answered softly. "That strength is not measured by size, nor by weapons, nor by bloodline. It is measured by the heart." Toma lowered his head, embarrassed. "I am no hero. I only stood where I was needed." Arya's lips curved into the faintest smile. "That is exactly why you are one." The next day, the people gathered in the central square of Aradia. A ceremony had been called. Nobles, soldiers, workers, and children stood side by side. The great banners of the empire hung over the square, though many were scorched from the battle. Arya stood before them all, her silver robe repaired, her crown gleaming in the morning sun. At her side stood Toma, simple in his plain clothes, looking out nervously at the vast crowd. Arya raised her hand. The crowd grew silent. "My people," she said, her voice carrying across the square, "we have seen the shadow of destruction. The Zirans came to break us, and yet we stand unbroken. But know this: the shield that held against the storm was not only forged by Iratian hands. A human stood with us, saw what we could not, and reminded us of the courage we had forgotten. Today, we honor him, not as an outsider, but as one of us." The crowd erupted with voices, first uncertain, then strong. Some clapped, others bowed, and many shouted Toma's name, though it felt strange on their tongues. He stood frozen, unsure what to do. Arya leaned closer and whispered so only he could hear. "Bow, or they will think you are taller than you are." He smiled awkwardly, bowed deeply, and the square thundered with approval. That night, when the city finally rested, Toma sat once more in the palace balcony. He looked at the stars above, scattered like silver dust across the endless sky. Somewhere beyond them, the Zirans gathered their strength again. He knew the war was not finished. But he also knew something else. Humanity would not face the galaxy as a shadow among giants. They would stand, speak, and be heard. Arya joined him, her steps quiet on the marble floor. For a long time, they simply looked at the stars together. Then, in the silence, Toma remembered the words he had once whispered when he first saw her. Words he thought no one had heard. Words that had changed everything. "She's so beautiful," he whispered again, this time not in fear, not in mistake, but in truth. Arya turned her head, her silver eyes meeting his. A faint light of warmth touched her expression. "I heard you the first time," she said softly. And in that quiet moment, under the vast and endless stars, two worlds so different, yet now bound together took their first step into a future no enemy could ever undo. For humanity had proven something eternal: they were not weak. They were not fragile. They were beautiful. And the galaxy would never forget it.